Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining today's third district panel for the Strong Foundations Framework Grant. We're excited to have you all here. I'm just going to give a brief overview today about our Strong Foundations program in case any of you have not made any of our previous Strong Foundations learning opportunities. So in a nutshell, the Strong Foundations is a comprehensive grant program written into statute with supports that are tailored to get more third graders to read on grade level. And so the Strong Foundations Math and Literacy Framework Development Grant is one of the first grants of the Strong Foundation supports that we're providing to districts. And so the idea behind this grant is to provide districts with building the why behind their instructional changes. So specifically, this grant will support districts in building out a research-based instructional framework, either in math or literacy, that will allow LEAs to streamline their instructional decisions that are rooted in their LEAs created and adopted framework. And so on this next slide, I'm briefly just giving a recap of the overall goals of this grant, which is for a district or charter to develop a content-specific research-based instructional framework that is agreed upon and adopted by a district or charter. And so as you see here, to support districts in this process, grantees will receive funds to support a collective learning process that is focused on the research on how kids learn in math and literacy. And so we're hoping our panelists today can delve a little bit into that. The grant will also help provide change management and stakeholder engagement support. It will also provide project management capacity for the process from start to finish. Grantees will also have access to a suite of exemplars that they can then adapt to fit their local context. Another great pro to this grant is that LEAs will get an opportunity to participate with other LEAs and a community practice, so they can all learn from each other as they're embarking on this framework development process and share some of their successes and challenges. The grant will also allow for about 30% of their funds to be spent on flexible funding to support travel, stipends, and other expenses. And lastly, LEAs who are awarded in this program will also be given priority for future TA grants that are aligned to either literacy or math. And so just a few friendly reminders in case this is the first of the Strong Foundations learning opportunities that you've attended. You can learn more about the grant by accessing the recordings that are on our website. We also include a grant overview that is on our Strong Foundations website. And then in case you have yet to apply for the first cycle of this grant, a friendly reminder to apply by next Friday, August 26th by end of day. And then also, if you have any questions about the grant or you would like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our team to discuss this grant in more detail, and whether this is the right support for your LEA at this time, you can reach us at the Strong Foundations email that's on the screen. And so to jump into our agenda today, we'll give a quick introduction of each of our panelists for about 1 minute each. They'll each then delve into about 10 minutes each, giving some of their overview of the reasons why they decided to embark on an instructional framework creation. We'll then save about the last 20 or 30 minutes to get questions from you all. And so in the meantime, if you all could just mute your microphones, and then as panelists are speaking, you can drop your questions into the chat. And then lastly, I'll wrap up with some closing and next steps for you all. So to get started, just do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Leslie Cuellar. I am the high quality instructional materials recruiting lead here at TEA. I am the well, actually, our work sits in the Instructional Materials Implementation Division of our Office of School Programs. And today I'm joined by Dr. Todd Davis, Aldine ISD, Misty Reiber, and Kim Callison for Lubbock ISD. And so I'll give Todd the floor for about a minute to give an introduction and then hand it off to Misty and Kim.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Leslie, for inviting me and inviting Misty as well in Lubbock. I'm looking forward to learning from Lubbock, and it's good to see you again, Misty. Well, my name is Todd Davis. I'm the Chief Academic Officer from Aldine ISD. This is my 30th year in Aldine. I began as a 4th grade teacher a long time ago and have had been blessed to have many different roles in Aldine, and I've been the Chief Academic Officer for the past 4 years. If you're not familiar with Aldine, Aldine, we're a large urban district just north of HISD, Houston ISD. So we're just north of Houston Independent School District. If you know where the Intercontinental Airport is, if you've ever flown into Houston, that is right in the core of Aldine. Our student population, we are 74% Hispanic, 23% African American, and 9 out of 10 of our students are considered economically disadvantaged. And we're hoping that by the end of this school year, we get back to around 70,000 students. We're not quite there yet, but that is our goal, to get back to that number where we were previously. But again, thank you for inviting me today, and I hope that we can share some valuable information with you.
Great, thank you so much for being here, Todd. And Misty and Kim, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Absolutely. We want to begin by saying a great thank you to Todd. A lot of what you will hear from Lubbock ISD is based upon a lot of support that we receive from Aldine. My name is Misty Reber. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Lubbock ISD. I've served in Lubbock ISD for over 27 years, but have not been in this role a full year yet. So we have been in a place of transition. Like Aldine, we have almost 26,000 students. We are a declining enrollment district, though. We're an urban city district. 3 out of 4 of our students are also economically disadvantaged. And you'll hear us talk a lot about looking for something that we needed some support, knowing that we needed some help and support as we look at our scores and our growth in reading. I'm going to let Kim Callison take a second to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Kim Callison. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and I am actually in the role that now that Misty was in previous. I have been in this position for just a few months. Prior to that, I've been an elementary principal in our district for the last 7 years. And prior to that, I was the RLA coordinator for many, many years. So I've been in Lubbock ISD for about 20 years. And looking forward to this new venture and continuing the work that honestly kind of was started in Aldine with Todd. I know that we have followed and that he's provided a lot of guidance for Misty in this role. So I'm looking forward to continuing the work that we've begun.
Well, thank you all for joining us today to share your experiences. Before we jump in to hearing from each of you, I just want to remind the audience again to keep yourself muted until we open up our Q&A. But also I encourage you all to just drop your questions in the chat as our panelists are talking. So let's go ahead and jump in. So we'll get started with Dr. Davis for about 10 minutes or so sharing, and then we'll jump to Misty and Kim for another 10. So to hit some of the high points. And these are just suggestions as y'all are talking. So we'd like to hear about your overall rationale for starting the work on building out a new instructional framework. Many LEAs who are probably here today have all the reasons why they're undergoing this development process. So we'd like to hear how y'all all embarked on this. We also like to hear a little bit about how you built a committee, which is one of the key steps in the framework development process. And then also, everyone wants to know the time. So what was your timeline that it took to build out a framework? And then lastly, what are the benefits that you've seen from building out a content-specific instructional vision? So Todd, I'll give you the floor and I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, all right. So, well, our journey into developing a literacy framework, that's where we started, began back in the spring of 2018. We had just received our STAR results. Our third grade performance with our third grade meets performance was it was horrific. We were extremely disappointed. And then in addition to that, we had just completed a comprehensive curriculum audit from TASA and the curriculum audit team. And the information from our curriculum audit basically said that the existing literacy curriculum in Aldine ISD, which was a balanced literacy curriculum, the units of study, the Lucy Calkins units of study that we were using, number one, they found some significant misalignment. 2, they found that there was very little investment throughout our district and then very little quality implementation. They had visited virtually 800 different classrooms in Aldine ISD and surveyed over 500 stakeholders, and the information that they've gathered together resulted in a finding from the curriculum audit that we needed to abandon that curriculum immediately because it was not serving the needs of our students. Now, I had just entered in to the role as a chief academic officer at the time, and thankfully we had just hired a new superintendent, Dr. Goffney, as well, and who was completely on board with us going a different direction. The challenge was, as a new chief academic officer, I had been a part of Aldine, and I had been immersed in that mindset of literacy instruction. I knew we needed to go a different direction, but I knew that if we made a hard technical change, that it was going to end up with the same results as our previous literacy curriculum, that an adaptive change process was absolutely necessary. So what I also knew is that Aldine, there's a lot of institutional pride in Aldine. And we had won the Broad Prize back in 2009, and that was still lingering. But yet our performance had completely fallen off from 2009, but yet there was still organizational pride. So I knew I needed to leverage that, and I needed to develop a process that was a grassroots effort, but was also, again, keeping in mind, an adaptive change. We needed to learn the new direction for literacy instruction in Aldine ISD because we were so immersed in what we thought was right. And so I pitched the idea of bringing together a task force, and with the purpose of developing a literacy framework, something that was going to be developed by Aldine for Aldine. And we got a green light on that, and we went ahead and we formed a literacy task force, which was in a collective group of Aldine educators. It spanned paraprofessionals all the way to core level individuals. We had school supervisors, we had principals, and of course, literacy coaches and teachers on this committee. And for the purpose of studying best practice and research and literacy instruction, and then again, ultimately to create a vision and framework that would define how our literacy expectations in Aldine ISD. Now, keep in mind, again, I didn't know what direction to go. And at that point in our understanding of literacy, the science of reading was not on our radar at the time. Thankfully, we were able to partner with an outside philanthropic organization called Good Reason Houston. Good Reason Houston connected us with TNTP. I then began discussions with TNTP, talking to them about our notion of developing a vision and framework for literacy instruction, that I brought together a task force, but had to be really vulnerable with them and basically say, but yet I don't know what to do next. I know I've put the structures together, but now help us go through the learning process. And I also wanted very much to be a learner in the process, not just leading the process. And so thankfully, TNTP, they knew exactly the direction that we needed to go. They were fully versed with the science of reading. And what we were able to do is we were able to then create what we now call our collective learning process in Aldine. And that is a process where we take a good amount of time, a good period of time. This is not a rush process. And for our literacy framework, it took us 6 months of monthly meetings with the task force where we came together and we learned the different tenets of the science of reading. And again, we were partnered with TNTP. We developed the sessions with TNTP, but we were able to also sit back and be learners in this process as well. And so as we went through this collective learning process, then as we were concluding, then we knew that it was time that we needed to pull together a subset of our task force to really dive in and start developing our vision and framework. And that's what we were able to do. Develop a vision and framework for literacy instruction that was rooted in the science of reading, has 4 key tenets and very specific role expectations throughout our district. And I believe it might be shared on the TEA website. I'm not sure, but I'm always open to share it with anyone who's interested. We've since done the same process for math, science, social studies, early learning, and multilingual in Aldine ISD. But with the literacy framework, then what we were able to do is we knew that where we stood with curriculum, that we did not have the resources necessary to make our vision and framework come to life. So then we were able to take that vision, and that became the driving force for us to then go out and adopt a curriculum that matched our vision and framework. And we studied multiple different curricula that covered the tenets of the science of reading. And what we ended up landing on was CKLA, the Amplify CKLA that the state then I believe a year later brought on board as well. So thankfully we were aligned with what the state ultimately did, because the support from the state has been fantastic from them. Now, I think one of the questions was, I want to go back to, how did we select that task force? And I think that is a very, very important thing to think about if you go through this process, because you don't want to select 40 or 50 people that you know are going to say and do what you want them to say and do. You want people that are going to be that are going to push against you. You want people that are going to be adversaries. You want people that ultimately, you know, that when the task force or the collective learning is completed, that they can be your champions throughout the district in whatever role they serve. Very important that even though they might see things differently and they might be a challenge to through the process, have confidence that they will come on board with you, but make sure that they are someone that is seen and respected in your organization, because you need them to be your champions and to help you continue to make sure that the vision framework becomes rooted and integrated deeply into your system. So we are now moving into year 3 of implementing our curriculum. We have seen significant gains in our reading performance. Not where we need to be yet. We're playing a long game in Aldine, and that's very important. Where I started with this, you know, the bottom fell out in our literacy performance in Aldine ISD. So we have quite a lot of ground to gain, but we have seen significant growth. And the vision and framework, even now that we're 4 years past the development of it, it still is a very integral piece of how we drive our messaging in Aldine, and how we make sure that we set the bar that every single teacher in Aldine ISD needs to be aligned with these tenets, and that we make sure that every student comes in every day and with high quality materials in front of them, with a skillful teacher who has high expectations for our students that's aligned with our vision and framework. And so very thankful that this process evolved for us. It has really transformed Aldine and the expectation for instruction across many subjects in Aldine. And it's really exciting that the state is also now coming on with this this grant opportunity, because there's such power in the opportunity for all of us as you embark on this, to collaborate and learn from one another. And I'm excited about that opportunity. So hopefully that helped. And Leslie, of course, will be open for questions later.
Yep.
So,
thank you. Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing. And now I'll hand it over to Kim and Misty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, we want to begin by saying a significant thank you to Todd. He mentored us through this process. Aldine walked through it a year ahead of us, and we were able to learn and grow from their experience. We also developed a literacy framework in the end. Our why is similar. Our reading scores were stagnant. We also were a balanced literacy district. We had a framework. The framework was 72 pages. You heard me correctly, 72. We teased people when they came to our first meeting that if they couldn't locate it and they were going to lose their job, would that cause all of us in the room to no longer be employed? And so we had something that was rich and deep that a committee worked on many, many years ago and put a lot of time and energy. But like you, we are seeing a teacher turnover rate. We are in West Texas. We're in a college town, home of Texas Tech University. We are seeing a teacher turnover that is unlike any other that we've ever seen before. We have young and new. We have many that are seeking a second career. And as you may know, being a balanced literacy educator is an art and a science that requires a master teacher in order to implement that. And so we were unable to get enough training poured into our teachers in a fast enough time period in order to maintain that. So we started seeing stagnant scores over time. Nothing was growing, nothing was changing. And what turned into a stagnant elementary turned into a significant middle school problem. So we had our middle schools were declining in their scores, and that was getting worse and worse over time. So we knew we needed to do something different. But when we built our committee, we decided that we wanted to revamp our literacy framework. And like Todd talked about, we wanted to be learners in that process. We wanted to discover and to see what would work. We all had participated in the reading academies. We had learned about the science of teaching reading, and we were ready to explore and learn more. But one of the things we knew is that we had to have a committee that impacted our entire community. Our universities actually teach balanced literacy as well. And we wanted to make sure that we connected. So our committee had over 62 members from the beginning. It included principals, teachers, instructional coaches, and we had university professors that participated on our committee. Our committee was open. We did an all call to anyone who wanted to participate. We know that is really large, and that might not be ideal, but it was important to us that enough of our base understood our changes, felt confident and comfortable in where we were going, and was ready to support us in that process. So we had this large committee. We had Aldine's great information, and we built ourselves a timeline. Our timeline, we worked for a school year. So we met for 9 months. We met one time a month. Each time a month, we took a component of the state's foundation of the science of teaching reading, or what we read and learned about that research. We evaluated that component based upon our old framework, based upon our data, based upon research that hit multiple sides. And then we rewrote that component of our framework. So we did that together as a collective team. We had protocols that were insane to make sure that everyone had a voice and everyone was a part of that discussion. And then at the end of each session, we created one portion of our framework. I'm excited to say at the end of our framework, we had a one-pager that we could use. When we finalized our framework, the committee voted on that framework. They felt comfortable and confident. We shared that with all of our principals, with our school board, with our teacher organizations, with everyone that we could visit with. We then came back and evaluated our current curriculum that was part of the state adoption that we were using, probably one many of you are using. And then we also evaluated Amplify. We had a small group of teachers that were piloting Amplify in the district, and we used our framework based on the science of teaching reading to evaluate those two curriculum. Our committee voted with a 97% rate to switch the following year to Amplify. Based upon that vote, many conversations with principals and a school board conversation, we became a K-8 Amplified district this school year that started yesterday. So we've had training all summer. We had our first day yesterday. We are really excited about where we're going. But the benefit is we made decisions based on a literacy foundation and framework. We didn't make a decision just on curriculum. We made a decision about PD, about learning, about training, about what we're doing, about what we believe about reading and writing and the reciprocal nature in this district. And that has given us language that I think will carry us through whatever decisions we make in the future. So I want to give Kim a chance to share too from that principal perspective.
Right. I, excuse me, I served on the literacy committee last year that Misty and her team at the time ran, but I also was the principal on a campus where we piloted Amplify, and I had 4 teachers. My background in training was with letters and Louisa Moat, so I'm very familiar with the science of teaching reading. And so when I had seen Amplify and kind of had been introduced to it, I was very excited. And so my campus began that study last year. We implemented, we also as a district, as part of that committee, as we started looking at the materials, once we had established that framework, we began looking at our current curriculum and looking at Amplify Both. One of the things that was really important is we spent the spring where teachers from across our district were able to come into our schools that were piloting and watch. They watched a 90-minute block or an hour and 20-minute block or a 90-minute block. And then they debriefed with those teachers that were using that curriculum. And I believe that really pushed us even further forward with some of the, maybe some of the teachers and the community members, stakeholders that weren't so certain about this change. Once they saw it in action, once they were able to talk to teachers that were implementing, and they talked about how it was following what they had learned in reading academies, and it was tied very closely to that framework, and they understood that. I think that helped in nothing more than buy-in across the district. So this summer, as we had our professional learning for Amplify, we didn't have a ton of pushback from teachers. They were well versed in what was coming, and many of them felt very comfortable because they had seen it in action already. And so that made a huge difference in the progress of where we were going. We'll start in the next few weeks. We will begin forming our committee for math, and we'll be going through the exact same process with math as well throughout this school year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim and Misty, for sharing. And so now, right at 12:30, more or less. And so we'll go ahead and open the floor for questions. I know Leslie just dropped just a suggestion for all you to drop questions, but if any of you want to come off mute and ask a question, please feel free.
Hello, Leslie. This is Pilar from Plainview ISD. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, Pilar. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I have watched the videos from Alding and also Lubbock previously, so I was familiar with some of the faces already. So congratulations for what you are doing for your districts. I think it's very exciting to hear the success that you're experiencing with going through the process of creating your own framework, right, with your own people. I wanted to ask you from the bilingual lens, how all of this is being tied with bilingual education at your districts.
Yeah, we included our bilingual department and a few bilingual of our dual teachers on our committee. And what we found after our first session together is that we kept moving people around, so they had different partners to meet with, and they requested if they could stick together to be part of those protocols and part of that process. And so as part of that, we also did a deep dive into Amplify from the SLAR version to look at that and to look into if we were going to include that as part of our pilot. But we included them. We have 5 dual campuses, and so we included them as part of that discussion.
Okay, so you're using Amplify for everybody right now, Misty and Lubbock?
We are using some. We're doing a little bit different thing on different campuses. So we have multiple dual programs running in our district within those 5 campuses. So we have multiple different implementations depending on the campus. For some, we're using Amplify for both the skills part and the reading comprehension part. And then for some, we're just using one component or the other.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. We immediately knew that we needed to include our SLA and SLA presence, and almost in the mindset that there was an equal presence between SLA and ELA. And it's completely in it. It's one literacy team that we wanted to make sure we established. So what we found, though, was really interesting. This is before we adopted Amplify before the Spanish version and the Texas version were developed. So there was no Spanish materials virtually out there that were of quality that matched our vision and framework. So we adopted Benchmark at the time. Benchmark has a very strong foundational Spanish curricula. And then what we used we purchased Amplify materials so that we could have the knowledge building in our English language development periods of time in our bilingual classes. But what we really did find out, the most beneficial knowledge that came out of this process was that we found that our bilingual programming was wildly inconsistent. As buildings were trying to order materials, that our time allotments and the structures that we thought we had in place were not being followed with fidelity. And so that launched us into, okay, now we need to change our bilingual programming. We were an early exit transition program. I could go off on that. That's a whole nother discussion. But we knew that we needed to change from that, and we needed to go to a one-way dual. We had already we had beginning of a two-way dual happening in Aldine ISD, but we had to go through the same process. I wanted it to be a grassroots, I wanted it to be a collective learning, and I wanted a recommendation for bilingual programming that came from a vision and framework that we developed. And so we went ahead and did that. So from our literacy process, it evolved into a multilingual, bilingual programming, ESL programming, collective learning, and vision and framework. And now I'm really proud to say that we are now in year 3 of building out our one-way dual, getting rid of the early exit transition, and then also building a two-way dual and a pathway all the way through high school. So thank you for that question, by the way.
Yes, thanks, Pilar.
Thank you.
Okay, Pilar, do you have any other follow-up questions, or we're good? Okay.
Probably we'll be reaching out to them because if we are giving the grant, probably we'll be reaching out to Lubbock first because they're closer, I guess. And then I'm very familiar, Gracie, that is the multilingual director, very close friends and colleagues. So I know where she is if we have questions about bilingual as well.
Great. Well, thanks. So I do see a question in the chat that is similar to something I wanted to bring up around. So one of our assurances for this grant is for LEAs to partner with an approved provider to receive that technical assistance for this grant. And so I know, Todd, you at Aldine partnered with TNTP to help with your instructional framework development process. In Lubbock, it looks like you did not have an approved provider. So I just wanted to see if you guys could delve in a little bit more on that to see like what role, if any, did those vendors have in this process. And then Todd, you hit on that a little bit, but if you could elaborate. Sure.
Well, the TNTP was really, they were critically important in guiding us through that first process, because again, we needed their knowledge. But what I think is very important when working with an outside service provider is that they come in with the mindset that they are a part of your team. That is, that you are driving the work, they're not driving the work necessarily, and they're not trying to push their initiatives. It is basically, you be very clear, and this is what we are hoping to accomplish. This is what we need for you to help us with, and finding that right service provider that come in with that mentality. TNTP from day one, that's what they demonstrated to us, and I learned that what I just shared with you through my experiences with TNTP. We've not had the same level of experience with other outside providers, and so I've learned to just be very clear, and this is what we expect out of the work, and we hope that you can be a support and you can enhance the work, accelerate the work to some degree, bring in some expertise, but ultimately it can't be stamped a TNTP framework. It is stamped an Aldine framework. Well, we couldn't have done it without them, so I'll say that.
And we did not we did not have an outside provider, although in some respects we did have the learning that Todd had. And so we also had some support from TNTP as well. We are very excited to be part of the grant, to have that opportunity in the future. I agree with exactly with what Todd said. It's very important that it is something that is for Lubbock ISD, that is by Lubbock ISD. I also think it's important that you meet with a group that supports you in that learning process, that doesn't have an end outcome goal or doesn't have a commitment of where you're going. The point for us is to learn more. We don't have a math framework that we're adjusting. We are starting from a blank piece of paper where we had a literacy framework that we were adjusting. And so keeping those conversations separate around what you are looking at for those instructional purposes versus curriculum purposes, I think are really important in this process.
Great, thank you, Misty. And just so for all of our LEAs, in terms of our approved providers, Leslie just dropped in the chat a list of the approved providers for this grant. We have about 21 approved providers and also 19 of our ESCs who are approved to provide technical assistance for this grant. So I would strongly suggest checking out that PDF. All their information is in there as well as their contact information. So great resource for you all to check out. So let's see, another question we have for Lubbock. So having gone through a literacy framework process, what, if anything, will you do differently to develop the math framework? And will the process be any different?
Yeah, as Misty said, it's going to be different in that with the support of the grant, we will have that outside provider that will be helping and providing that support. And we are starting from scratch. We don't have a framework currently in place. So the development will be different in that regard. We're going to have to do some extensive study and research into the research rather behind mathematics in order to begin that work. We will probably do our committee very similarly as we did last time. I want to keep that open to whoever wants to participate and is passionate about us, laying that path for math. So it will look different in that regard just because we are starting from ground zero on this one.
I have a quick follow-up on that. For Lubbock specifically with your math framework, do you envision higher ed playing the same role, or did you think that was really specific to literacy?
Yeah, we actually appreciated higher ed being there, and we've actually already had some interest from higher ed again. We work very closely in tandem with our universities. And it's important to us that they're a part of that conversation because it's impacting the way that they're teaching our students in the education department as we train them. Right. So we want to make sure that as we're learning something, they're learning something so that when they go through that tech teach process, then we're all on the same page as we move forward together.
Thanks, Kim and Misty. And so here's another question in the chat. So for Todd, what changed after you developed your math framework? And what did you find out during that process?
Yeah, so quite a bit has changed. I think getting back to the what would we have done different, just to touch on that a little bit, and this kind of goes to answering this question. We learned that we needed to make sure that we included community and parents. That was not done in our literacy, and that was so beneficial as we've moved into other vision framework development. But I would say, I think one of the critical position that needs to be included are principal supervisors. If you have principal supervisors in your district, to try to get every single one of them. We have 6 in our district, and we did just a sampling, and as we continue to move forward, we have included all of them, because that is where that next level push towards making sure that this becomes systemic is really very important at that level, at that position. So getting back to what have we seen differently with the math? Well, we did implement Eureka system-wide and Carnegie system-wide at the secondary level. So we were able to, of course, utilize our vision and framework to help us in that decision process. It becomes the anchor because the math curricula is, we are finding, is much harder to implement than the literacy. It's taking a lot longer for people to gravitate to it, and the successes are not as readily available as with the literacy curriculum. But what we are doing, though, is we are making sure that we always fall back on the framework, that this curriculum, we are not using this curriculum. Well, let me rephrase this. What's really, really important is that it is not necessarily, you didn't select the curriculum because of the curriculum. You selected the curriculum because of the tenets of your vision and framework, because of your belief system that you've developed as a district, and always making sure that that's your anchor. And so then as we are moving through the slower process of getting the math curriculum to really hold, we're trying to leverage as many wins as we can, and then and celebrating the wins as they are in relation to our vision and framework. Productive struggle, increased discourse. Those are two main parts of our math framework. When we see that, we celebrate it. And I can tell you, though, that when we do go into our classrooms now, opposed to what we saw 2 years ago, we definitely see that there's much higher level of expectations and rigor. The discourse and the productive struggle is a real thing, and we can call it, we can name it, and it's exciting that as a point that we're going to leverage and continue to move forward as we get through getting this math curricula to just really take hold and be integrated into our system.
Thank you. And I'm going to jump in here on this next question, because I see a couple of questions coming in that I think are all somewhat related. In reference to the grant, we do have some guidelines around how you spend grant funds. We're asking that 70% of your grant award goes into contracted services to get a partner on board and help guide you through this process. So I know there's a couple questions around what type of supports from the providers did you find most beneficial with that 70%? How can you think about leveraging those funds with an approved provider? And I think the flip of that too, we do have guidance around the remaining 30% that can essentially be flexible funding to support the process. So I'd love to hear just thoughts from Todd and Misty around, with some additional money to when you guys have gone through this process, what would that have been helpful for, and how would you think about breaking down your budget?
Okay. One of the things we've talked about, Leslie, that we weren't able to do in this last round is even giving our teachers a stipend for participating. We held all of our meetings after school in the evenings. They were designed to be 2 hours a piece over the course of 9 months with homework and pre-work in between. And we didn't pay anyone to do any of it this last round, and they did it gladly. And we were grateful for that, but we had wished in the end that we could have at least a small token of money for a babysitter or something else. We weren't looking for something significant, but something just to honor their time and respect would have been helpful. And we have discussed that maybe that would be a potential for the other portion of the grant. And this sounds silly, but maybe snacks, maybe dinner, something just to give that morale boost to be appreciative of the people, because the intensity with which they read and studied and learned. We did a book study. They did a great deal of work to be prepared, and they took it very seriously. And we know we have a lot more learning to do when it comes to math. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything Misty said. Being able to compensate the people on the panel, I think would be super helpful. That was something we were not able to do. We did all of our collective learnings during the day. It would have been nice to have used some outside of the school day time to be able to do that. But I think the important thing for us was the fact that we were able to, again, be learners and allow TNTP to do the bulk of the planning of our collective learning sessions. We were still doing our day jobs, and we needed to focus on a lot of new things, and there was a lot of change happening, and probably similar to what's happening in your district. So what we would do is we had scheduled a regular cadence of meetings and check-ins with TNTP, where we would sit and we would plan together collaboratively what our vision was for that upcoming session. Then they would do the bulk of the planning, and then they also did the presentations, the learning was actually delivered from TNTP, which I personally really enjoyed because I needed to learn. And that was, but I think another big part of this whole process is that if you're going to be doing a 180 change in literacy instruction, there's got to be a point where leaders in the districts stand in front of your group and be very vulnerable and say, yes, I want to learn as well. And we're going to put away the past, whatever involvement we may have had. And what we're doing is we're going into the future together. So just being able to let the outside provider lead that is so very important. And then in addition to that, and I'm not sure if this works within Leslie or not, but the possibility of potentially piloting some materials throughout the collective learning process is really, really important. And then also thinking about what is the immediate learning that goes outside of that task force that is necessary to really start that runway into building it out across the district. Is that possibly some funds to then get in front of principals, assistant principals, to start gaining some more systemic understanding of the vision and framework, and so on.
Those were great. And one thing that, Todd, I think you started to touch on too was, and I know you guys with your literacy framework, I believe, I had the outcome of selecting new instructional materials, which may not be the case for everyone, and that's fine. But I know one thing that you guys actually did was get out and travel a good bit as well. So can you talk through how you guys, with some extra funding might leverage travel and how that fits in with this work?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because that was really the tipping point for us to be confident in moving to a new curriculum, because we were able to get out. Like I said, we had studied, I think there were 4 main curricula that we studied at the time, and we were able to go off to other districts throughout the nation and see the curriculum in action and actually talk to the leaders and the teachers in those districts. And when we were able to see it, that's when, like I said, all the confidence came together and we were able to make some decisions. So if that's a possibility for this in the grant, I think yes, absolutely. And thankfully, you don't have to go across the nation. We can travel within Texas and see some great things happening. So that's a really good point.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, so I'm looking through the chat to see if there are any other questions. We do have some questions in terms of resources, in terms of the research for this grant. So I know, Missy, you did share a resource here, but are there any other research-based resources that, well, I guess I should actually preface that is that as part of the grant, LEAs will be undergoing a collective learning process that is based on our research-based instructional strategies. And so in this grant, you will all be exposed to the research, some of the research that both Misty and Todd have reviewed as part of their development process in terms of the science of reading. And so we'll also make sure that we will share some resources with you all in terms of that. And let's see if there are any other questions. So in terms of, just going back to providers, there's a question here of the types of supports for providers and what were the most beneficial supports that you've received?
Okay, I want to make sure I heard that right. So what were the most beneficial supports that we received from the provider? Okay, for me, it was just clearly that we were able to hand over to them the design and the delivery of our collective learning sessions. Like I said, we collaborated, we worked together, but bottom line is that I was able to hand it to them with full confidence and be a learner in the process. That was the most beneficial.
And that's what we're looking forward to with the math framework, because Misty and her team had to do all the planning for the delivery of that each month. That was very time consuming, and it required them, of course, to plan ahead, research ahead, and then do all that development. And so we're definitely looking forward to the benefits of having someone else be able to plan that and help with the delivery.
Great, thank you. I do see a couple of other specific grant questions. So there's a question about the typical grant award. And so for LEAs who are applying for this grant, so our award amounts vary by enrollment. And so I think we did drop a grant calculator in the chat in case you want to access that. That is on our website. And so you can populate in what your LEA enrollment size is. And then also if you decide if you're going to apply for math or literacy, and that calculator will populate a fixed number for you so you can see the amount that you would receive if you apply for this grant.
I'm really thinking that's one thing we haven't covered, but maybe, well, in our last couple of minutes here, maybe a good last question to wrap up on. On the application, districts will have the opportunity to apply for both a math and literacy framework development or just one. And I know that this has actually been tackled different ways in Aldine and Lubbock, where Lubbock started with one, and Todd, you guys started with one as well, but now you have kind of got the process down and are running a couple at a time. Would y'all mind just speaking to the rationale of focusing on one versus trying to do this with multiple framework development processes at one time?
For us, Leslie, in Lubbock, because we began the work without a provider, I don't know that we had capacity to run more than one at a time with what we were asking our principals to do and our instructional coaches. If we had had support, we may have been able to run both. I don't think that we could have run two committees at once where the same people served on both committees. We asked our people to do too much work and spend too much time studying and reading in the process. So it was better for us to do one and then the other.
Yes, I completely agree with Misty. I think also if this is being done to be an agent of change in your district, you need to think about what can your system, how much change can your system really handle at one time? And we knew that literacy was our starting block, but if we had piled on math or added on math from there, the impact that our literacy framework had in the curriculum, it would have been diluted significantly. So just think about how much your system can change, and then also I've come to realize that we're not looking for quick fixes. A vision and framework really should be the model of systemic change that sets that puts together generational change and leads to generational change in your district. So play the long game. Don't just think of it as a quick fix.
Great. And so we have about 5 minutes left, and let's see if is there any one last question that the audience would like to ask before we wrap up. And you can also come off mute if it's easier.
Since you don't have somebody with a question real quick, just because with some of the federal grants I've reviewed and some of the stuff that I've been doing, is anyone working on that? Literacy in math is not the same thing as literacy in social studies and science or English language arts, because you have a different word base that the kids need to have kind of introduced and understanding of.
Todd, I don't know if you want to speak to that. I know that you guys have explored more of kind of these, I think what he's getting at is kind of cross-content pillars.
Yes, yeah, we have. And that's actually something that we, after completing our science and social studies, reflecting on this and hearing feedback that people are seeing them in isolation. And it's very important that we are now coming back and we're looking at how do we find the connections between all of our frameworks, and then also making sure that much of there's a lot of overlap within the frameworks, not necessarily having to find disingenuous connections. We're trying to make sure that it is very clearly aligned. And there's also some work I believe that TEA is doing with this notion in mind as well, as making sure that the framework development, that there's some support around making the connections and leading to some confidence and clarity for teachers when having to navigate multiple frameworks.
Mm-hmm. And for Lubbock, we have not yet developed a science and social studies framework. We did put some content literacy in our reading literacy framework. And then we've done a great deal of work in our district around Isabel Beck's work and looking at the tiers of words and how we use vocabulary. And that is something that I think has supported some of our foundation in some of our conversations for science and social studies.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Todd, Kim, and Misty, again for joining our panel today. Thank you all for joining and hearing as Lubbock and Aldine share their experiences with their instructional framework development process. I'm going to share my screen now, just as a quick reminders to wrap up for those of you who are still interested in applying and yet have not yet applied. We do have our application deadline approaching next Friday, August 26th. The application can be found on our Strong Foundations website. Also, this recording from today's panel, in addition to previous webinars, can also be found on our website. So there's a wealth of information that you all can access on our website about this grant. And then of course, if you have any questions about the grant, or if you want to talk one-on-one with our team about how this grant can fit your local needs, we are always more than happy to jump on a 30-minute call with you all. So just reach out. You can reach us at our Strong Foundations email. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all again for joining and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.